Hi ethics students, Dr. Bowen here. I just wanted to give you this very brief overview of moral development theory. There is a handout for you on Blackboard that summarizes the reading in your textbook, but I thought it might help to put it in a little context for you and add some detail. So moral development theory is as old as the time of Aristotle in the ancient Greek world, looking at how people inculcate virtues, how they become better people over time. It's no coincidence that the more aged are oftentimes more wise and therefore thought to be more ethical. Moral development theory simply seeks to explain why and look at the cognitive and social variables that go into making that happen. So let's skip forward a little bit to the work of Jean Piaget. Not that much forward, but he was born in 1896 and conducted most of his research in Switzerland. Piaget looked at the question of nature versus nurture. So what makes someone ethical? Which influence has the bigger role? And he found out essentially the answer was yes. So what that means, it's neither one or the other, but some of each. And he also developed the term cognitive schema that gave us a way to understand how people frame moral decisions in their own mind, how nature and nurture play a role, but something more intellectual within ourselves, such as how you see yourself, how you see the world, and how you see the nature of the moral deliberation that you're facing. So cognitive schema is very similar to the looking glass self, part of the Chicago School sociology developed by Charles Cooley. It essentially means that in your mind you postulate how do others see you, how might people reflect upon the behavior in which you're about to engage, how might others face a similar decision, and what deliberations might they take into account. He also gave us the idea that there's such thing as a heteronomous decision, meaning you make an ethical choice based on the concrete interests that you have in that decision. And then a higher level of moral development would be the autonomous type of decision that is based on moral principle and what you see as right per se, or a priori right in and of itself based on reason. So moving forward, we have another influential researcher discussed in your textbook, Lawrence Kohlberg, and his most famous or most cited work probably was published in 1969, although he had numerous works and had essentially a worldwide influence on the field of moral development. And Kohlberg gave us the stages of moral development by actually studying in his laboratory how school children made decisions using cognitive tests, direct observation, and so on. So in his laboratory, he would watch these interactions, but they would also follow these children over longitudinal studies, the course of years, and see how they developed through the different age groupings, as well as looking at gender differences. So essentially what we found is with moral development theory, if you're looking at what Kohlberg published and going back, it reiterates what Piaget found as well. There are three very large levels, each comprised of two stages. The preconventional level is when people are infants and they're not yet moral. In the preconventional years, there's the first stage in which you react to punishment. So very reactionary, almost animalistic in the sense of a very simple reaction to negative reinforcement. The second stage is a desire to receive rewards and praise. So the preconventional level, you can see, probably lasts until you're roughly 6 years old, and sometimes that does depend on a number of factors, including gender. But from the time you're born until you're 6, you're really thinking about avoiding punishment or reacting to punishment, and then add to that a desire to receive rewards and praise. So that's the preconventional level, very simple, and it's easy to remember because it also works in obedience schools, training dogs or similar situations. But people continue to develop. We continue to develop cognitively and morally. And that's where it becomes really interesting. So let's move to his second level, the conventional level. And that's where we start to see a lot of role conformity based on socialization, also going back to potentially those cognitive schema and the looking glass self. So the first stage is the good boy and nice girl morality, where you want to react to the expectations of your peers and your parents and those who were influential in your life, such as school teachers and so on. It seeks a desire for acceptance, trying to get along with what is expected in your role. For example, if you're in this stage and you are dancing or you're sitting at a desk, it's all defined on context. You may be dancing if you are part of a dance team or trying out for a cheerleading squad. If you're doing that in a classroom, it's aberrant behavior. You should be sitting quietly at the desk and paying attention. So that gives you an example of that. The second stage is understanding what the norms are and learning to behave within the realm of how you're supposed to act. So essentially a larger context that goes across many places that are different, such as public parks, hallways, stores, shopping malls, etc. How are you supposed to act in those environments, and what are the realms of behavior that's expected? You can go a little further into the teenage years with this one because you really see a lot of activities that people use their judgment on what's acceptable in certain places. So that's the second stage of the conventional level. The third level of moral development is the autonomous, principled, or post-conventional level. For brevity, we'll just call this one the autonomous level. But the first stage in this one is where most people stop their moral development. So contract and individual rights is the first stage of the autonomous or post-conventional level of moral development, and it does talk about the rights of individuals as well as the responsibilities of individuals being your primary concern. So you're a good citizen and you pay your taxes because that's what you're supposed to do to be a good citizen. And that's the extent of the thinking. You do it because you're supposed to do it, and it's your right and your responsibility to do it. And along with those rights, you have a set of legal rights, depending on country and context as well, and people act in accordance with those legal rights. In Germany, you drive very fast on the Autobahn where there's not a posted speed limit, and you slow down over bridges and where people are entering and exit the Autobahn. But you don't necessarily do that in the United States, even if our road system is comparable on an interstate in Montana, for example. There's still going to be a speed limit. And you do what's expected because it's part of the contract that is socially placed upon you. Most people stop at this phase of moral development. They don't question contract or individual rights. And we could argue that it may even be a sociocentric error in critical thinking because they never think, well, why should I do that? What's the difference in place? What's the difference in timing? What's the difference in rights for me versus someone else, and so on. So let's move on to the most interesting level of moral development. That is the rationality or autonomous and principled stage of post-conventional reasoning. So this is the highest level of moral development. We're still within the autonomous and post-conventional level, but this stage is as high as one can go because it's based on rationality, reasoning, and moral principle. It's not based on location. It's not based on cultural norms or sociocentric thinking. It's not even based on what's accepted in society. In this stage, we get acting according to reason, where you can create a rational defense for your ethical and moral arguments, and you accept that as valid regardless of what society says. Society is not a constraint, and you determine what's right rather than having what's right imposed on you by others. So in this level, the highest level and the top stage, the rational approach, we will get different behavior than what's expected by society. So we'll see people breaking radically with what's socially accepted, such as Rosa Parks sitting on the front of a bus and saying she's not going to move even if she gets arrested, because rationally the seats in the front should be the same as the other seats, and why can't she sit there if everyone is equal? So this gives us a great exemplar of moral reasoning. There are another few examples coming up in the class, in the films we'll watch, and later in the semester, one of the most moving things that we study is Tank Man in the Tiananmen Square massacres. So that, I don't want to give away too much, but that is a wonderful example of the highest level of moral development. Essentially, to get to this level of moral development, you have to do a few different things. You can do one or all of these things. Obviously, the first would be to take an ethics class. So we're there. We're going to be there by the end of the semester. Actually, probably by the end of February, we're all going to be there, because you're going to learn to use Kantian decision making, which is extremely rational and very principled. So you can do an ethics class. You can spend a lot of time studying religion or rights and freedoms in a larger sense, not just the legal sense, but in the human sense. So humanitarian causes, for instance, ways to prevent genocide, the outrageous atrocities imposed on us with human trafficking or sexual slavery. So thinking about these type of things, or spending time studying them and working with them, gets you to that higher level of moral reasoning. Theology, ethics, human rights, thinking about things in a critical thinking perspective also gets you there. So that's why we began our course with critical thinking and how to avoid the egocentric and sociocentric thinking traps that people often fall into. Learning to think autonomously is the most important thing you can do as a university student, because then you can apply that to any field, be it computer science or public relations or physics, engineering, art, or history. Learning to think autonomously and critically is the highest level of moral development and gives you great intellectual freedom. So I hope this little review has helped you very much. And if you have any questions, I'm always happy to hear from you. Take care, and thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.